Okay. So good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight, all of you. Please note we are recording the program. I just said that, I guess. And we'll post it to our YouTube channel later this week, so you can watch it again and again with all our other videos. My name is Christina Culp. I don't always sound like this frog that I sound like, but that's what it's like right now. I'm the director of Marsh, and we're a chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation in the Marvin area of Union County. And we're focused on the 28173 zip code, which includes Waxhaw as well. Our mission is to engage our community and educate them about the benefits of restoring and protecting wildlife habitats, like all the other chapters of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. If you're a member of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation or decide to become one in the future, you can select Marsh as the donor chapter affiliation and receive a membership fee. And that allows us to continue continue programming like we're doing tonight. And I'd also like you to consider, if you're in our area, because I think some of you may not be, but to join the Marsh planning group. We have lots of great ideas that we'd like to implement, but we're a pretty small team, and it would be great to have more people at the table. We mostly focus on educational opportunities for our community, and we could certainly do a lot more with more people. If you're interested, you can send me a note on the chat here, or you can send us an email at marsh4wildlife@gmail.com. And Leanne will try to help me with the chat box along the way. Before I introduce tonight's guest, let me remind you about our next speaker and topic. On October the 26th, Allison Medford will join us to discuss a fascinating topic, bats. You kind of either love them or you hate them, and hopefully we can make you a lover, not a hater. Just in time for Halloween, that one. So we planned that so that it would be right there the week before Halloween. That'll be October the 26th at 6:30. Bats have an important role in our ecosystem and are most well known for being voracious mosquito eaters. And I've heard a lot of people complaining about mosquitoes this year, so maybe you need a bat. Allison is a district wildlife biologist in the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission and has a special interest in bats and loves to share that knowledge. We're hoping, fingers crossed, that we'll be able to have this as an in-person event at the barn in Marvin Eford Park. And if it's looking like we're going to be able to do that, we'll forward that information to our email list, and you will be on that email list now that you've attended this. And because it's close to Halloween, we're going to take advantage of that opportunity and say anybody who wants to wear a Halloween costume or whatever you want to call it, feel free to do so, as much to entertain each other as anything. And obviously this will be a kid-friendly event. So hopefully kids can come and we'll all dress up and it'll be a blast. And it'll be like old times. Tonight, though, we want to talk about trees. And at least in my opinion, I think they're probably the most important plant in our landscape. They're certainly the largest plant in our landscape. And it's important for us to understand how trees stabilize and improve the health of the planet, but it's also important to understand how trees stabilize and improve our own health. So tonight, Dave Cable is going to increase our tree knowledge. He's the director of the Davidson Land Conservancy and was formerly the executive director. He's the executive director of Davidson Land Conservancy and was formerly the executive director of Tree Charlotte, Catawba Lands Conservancy, and the Carolina Thread Trail. If you haven't been on that trail, pick it up somewhere. There's a lot of it, and go walk around on the Carolina Thread Trail. There's actually some in Union County for sure. During his time with Catawba Lands Conservancy, the group conserved more than 5,000 acres of land. And with all the development, at least that I see around my house, that is quite impressive and really important. He is passionate about land conservation and especially passionate about trees, which you're about to find out. Hopefully our discussion tonight will increase your passion for trees as well and be a call to action to conserve the trees we have and to add more trees to our landscape whenever you have that opportunity. Please add your questions to the chat box, and we'll cover those at the end of toward the end of the presentation. And mute your line while the presentation is in process. And Dave, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Christina, so much. I appreciate it. That was a wonderful introduction. And I'm delighted to be here with all of you tonight. I'm a huge fan of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation and have known Tim for a long, long time, and have admired him greatly over the years. And I'm now on the board of the Federation, and I'm enjoying that. And that's given me an opportunity to learn more about how the organization works. And I'm so impressed with all the great work that's going on the chapter level throughout the whole state. And so let me just start by thanking all of you for being involved at the chapter level, those of you particularly in the leadership role, for all that you do in the community. And the model of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation really, really works well. And I'm a huge believer in it for a whole bunch of different reasons. Number one, I see it as a science-based organization, and it does a great job with being driven by the science. Number two, it's mission driven. It has this great high impact youth program. And then fourthly, it has really effective chapter network that, as Tim likes to talk about, an army of conservationists that are out there, and then the fifth component of it is being so adept at policy work, both at the federal level and primarily at the state level. That's so important. So I'm delighted to be here tonight and part of the organization, and really appreciate this opportunity. So thank you for having me. I'm a big tree lover and have been for a long time, but back 1,000 years ago when I was in graduate school, I took a lot of forestry classes, but they were all about silviculture and tree production and tree soils. And, there really wasn't an opportunity to learn about at all urban forestry. And the difference between tree production and urban forestry is that urban forestry is about this connection point between people and trees. And so tonight I'm going to have a bias toward talking about that because we live in an urbanizing area, some areas more urban than others. And the trees add so much value to our quality of life and our resiliency as a community. And I have bought in lock, stock, and barrel with this idea that they are one of the wonderful wonders of life, and something that we need to pay a lot more attention to. The whole great potential for our community long term. Kind of four big picture things that I'll mention here at the outset, and you'll probably hear me resonate these throughout the discussion tonight. Number one, when it comes to urban forestry, we need to be really deliberate about what we do. This is not about letting a field kind of return and let nature take its course. The reality is that the wonderful urban forests that we have in this country exist because someone a long time ago took the care to plant and steward trees that they put all that energy into, with knowing full well that they would never enjoy the shade of those trees. And so it's this wonderful kind of intergenerational concept of creating something in a very intentional way that has a profound impact in the community. Number two, the urban forest needs constant replenishment. This is not a resource that you build it and kind of let it go. It's something that constantly needs to be dealt with. It needs to be replenished, culled. The trees need to be cared for and replaced, and in some cases removed. And so there is this, as in the case of land conservation, I think a trend toward thinking about endowments to care for urban forests, knowing that they're going to need this constant care over a long, long period of time. Number three, they are vital to the quality of life and our resiliency and wildlife habitat in urban environments. And I got thinking about this concept of urban forestry, and when I was in school, that you couldn't take it. Well, you couldn't take an urban wildlife course either. And now, of course, there's a lot in the literature about urban wildlife management. And so, I think the trees are a vital component of all of that. And then third, and lastly, not third, but fourth, and lastly, is that the urban forest is really a community resource, but 95% of it is held by private individuals, because the vast majority of the forest in any given jurisdictional area is controlled by private interest. And so you've got public good at stake and the public benefits from these trees as a public resource, and yet they're really privately held. And that makes it tricky in terms of resource management, and something we all need to be thinking about. And that's particularly challenging in a state like North Carolina, where, as many of you probably know, because of the Dillon Rule of establishment in North Carolina, Raleigh really determines what local governments do. We, at the local level, whether it's state or county, these are all arms of the state. And so we are largely, directed by what goes on in Raleigh. And every year in the legislature, there are attempts to remove the abilities of local municipalities to control their own urban forest. And that's something that we need to constantly be looking after. So I will go through this slide deck fairly quickly. And I think, Christina, we're talking about putting questions in the chat room and then maybe dealing with them afterwards, right?
That's right.
Okay. Well, there are, and if anybody can't see this, obviously let me know, but hopefully you can all see the screen. There, if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, you'd have to study and look, and you'd find the Arbor Day Foundation, and you'd find a few other organizations that were involved in fairly large-scale tree planting efforts. Well, today, there is just a huge amount of efforts, and most notably the Nature Conservancy, which was really not involved much in terms of particularly urban forestry going back 10 or 15 years. And I think this relationship between what communities need for resiliency and climate change issues, and that relationship to trees has really come home in the minds of a lot of people. And if you look at the science, you can be quite compelled by that. I will say that and I put a couple quotes up here, as I kind of cruised around the internet recently, just looking at some of these, like the Billion Tree Initiative from the Nature Conservancy, there are a significant number of doubters out there, and organizations that think that this really take us off mission of addressing the real issues around climate change, and that in some cases planting trees isn't always the wisest thing to do, particularly in water constrained areas. So, but I think generally speaking, there is a fairly wide acceptance of the importance of trees. Not that trees should be planted everywhere maybe, but that they really are a critical piece, not the only piece, but a critical piece to solving climate change over the long run. So I put a picture of the pine here just to remind you all that the state tree in North Carolina is the pine tree, because after all, we are the Tar Heels, and it's a nondescript pine tree as our state tree. In the urban environment, trees benefit us in many, many ways. One of the ways that's most significant is in terms of really serving to help reduce stormwater runoff, which many of you may know in an urbanizing area is kind of our number one issue. We have highly erodible soils here. We are having an increased intensity of storm events, and we have a lot of impervious surface. And to a large degree, a fairly unregulated watershed protection program. So what happens is, in the case of this photograph, this is of Johnson Creek. The large body of water at the lower section of the screen is the upper reaches of Mountain Island Lake. This is about a mile north of the water intake for Charlotte. And this is the outflow of Johnson Creek, one of the two main tributaries to Mountain Island Lake. In Gaston County, it reaches up into Lincoln County. There's a 500-acre piece of land called the Woodcock Farm, which is on Johnson Creek. And about 2 months before this picture was taken, it was clear cut. And this is a 2-inch rain event in September of 2019. And you can see the turbidity level in the water and what is happening here. And, trees are critical to helping to reduce stormwater runoff, which is our number one issue in terms of water quality control in our community. This slide doesn't look like it's coming through very well, but this is basically a slide of a piece of forested land versus land that is developed. And basically the story here is that if you take a 1 acre of woods next to a stream and you throw on top of it a 1-inch storm event in August, you effectively get no runoff to the stream. However, if that 1 acre is paved and you have a 1-inch storm event in August, you're going to get 27,000 of water that reach that creek. And in August, it's going to be hot water and do a lot of damage to the aquatic life of that creek. And the presence of forest areas close to streams and in riparian corridors is really important to combating, runoff and turbidity issues in water quality. Oh yeah, here's the picture of the parking lot. This is a picture taken about 5 miles northwest of Marvin in the Carolina Place Mall area. And it's a pretty good example of, how impervious surface has gone crazy in our community. And if you just imagine, this is Little Sugar Creek that's partitioning this sketch, the amount of runoff that is making its way into these surface waters as a result of all this impervious surface is kind of overwhelming. And so we probably haven't really thought this through very well as a community in terms of protecting our water resources by adding additional impervious surface and removing trees simultaneously. Many of you have seen these maps. These are growth maps that I worked on with UNC Charlotte back in 2006. They're a little bit dated, but we took population trends and looked at their relationship to impervious surface, and then created a graphical image out to 2030. And I don't know how we are on the continuum here in terms of how this is actually played out in time. But the stresses on our environment, we're all benefiting from growth, and the economic growth is a good thing in terms of employment opportunities. And, I believe that it's a critical piece of our quality of life, but it has to be balanced with care for the environment. And this continuous concept of or continuous addition of impervious surface is at the removal of trees is definitely causing some issues straining our water quality. I mean, I don't know about Union County, but effectively all 3,000 miles of streams in Mecklenburg County are impaired at this point. So we haven't been a good steward, although some water quality areas are coming back, and that's a good thing. I talked a little earlier about the importance of intentionality when it comes to urban forestry. Many of you, and I don't have pictures of Marvin, unfortunately, I wish I did, or Waxhaw, but I know a lot about Charlotte, and these are some historic pictures of Charlotte that are readily available. This happens to be Dilworth, right around the turn of the century. And what you don't realize, or many people don't realize when they drive around Eastover and Myers Park and Dilworth in Charlotte, is that they were all, cotton fields way back when, and clear cut as compared to the way that they are today. This is a picture of Myers Park, again, somewhere between 1900 and 1910. And you can see there are basically no trees around. And fortunately, due to some good efforts on the part of a lot of thoughtful people, there were some pretty significant willow oaks that were planted out in riparian areas, transplanted, and very, very intentionally laid out in the community, both in terms of their placement, but also the creation of planting strips in the community. And when I talk about planting strips, I'm talking about the separation between the curb and the sidewalk. That strip in the urban environment is a very, very important strip for trees. And the tendency is to have them be narrowed over time because it provides for more land area for development. But the neighborhoods that really have the most gracious and grandiose canopies are those that have the widest planting strips. Another historic picture of transplanting a willow oak in the Myers Park area. And of course, this is what what the area looks like today, thanks to those efforts. Now, I will say this about the willow oak: it is a great urban tree, and it has been highly resilient to all sorts of things. But we lost a lot of them during Hugo. Many of them survived. The average life of the tree, 100, 125 years, maybe a little bit more than that on occasion. They're quite resistant to pollution. They have withstood cankerworms and a lot of other things. We've not had a blight specific for willow oak, and we've been very fortunate because we are way over invested in willow oaks. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in a little while is the importance of tree diversity when we plan the urban forest, because we never know what critter is around the corner, or fungus or emerald ash borer or whatever it might be. And those communities that have diversified forests have really withstood the test of time much better than those that have not. So the benefits of the forest, whether it's Marvin or Charlotte or Davidson — I live up in Davidson at the other end of the county — are really great. And many of you will know all of these. But, we talk about cleaner air. A lot of people think, well, trees produce oxygen, and that's an important part of air quality. And I suppose it is. But what trees really do that's most important in terms of air quality is that they remove particulates. And there have been more and more studies done about the importance of removing particulate matter in the urban environment. That's quite significant. They do capture carbon, this miracle of photosynthesis, which, we all studied back in intro bio, and thought, okay, well, that's another thing. How cool is that? Well, when you really think about, here's a tree that's incredibly complex in its design. It takes in sunlight and it mixes it with water, and it produces energy so that it can live off that. And at the same time, captures the carbon, processes the carbon dioxide, and provides us with energy, all gracefully working 24/7. We don't even think about it. I mean, it's a pretty amazing thing that trees do. They are significant, particularly in our area, for reducing stormwater runoff. They cool our streets and obviously reduce the energy use in our homes. There's pretty significant information about property values, and in the urban environment, they are absolutely critical to wildlife habitat and a significant contributor to that. This is the miracle of photosynthesis. I kind of covered this earlier. And, at one point when I was with Tree Charlotte, I go into grade schools and talk about photosynthesis. And it was really the first time in probably 40 years that I've really even thought about it. And it is quite an amazing thing when you think of what the trees do and how fortunate we are to have them as the friends that, that are throughout our landscape. Not all trees are created equal in terms of their wildlife and ecosystem value. I'm a huge Doug Tallamy fan. I'm sure that there are a lot of other Doug Tallamy fans on the phone or on the call. So this is all kind of straight out of Doug's information. But, I'm a big white oak fan to begin with. And when you look at the wildlife quality value of a white oak, it's pretty extraordinary. He makes the point that nationally, they support about 557 different species of caterpillars as compared to some of the other, trees in our area, which support a lot less. So the white oak is a long-lived tree. They're beautiful and gracious. They're native. They're quite drought tolerant. And they, of course, provide this incredible habitat for the wildlife. And many of you may be familiar with this website from the National Federation called Native Plant Finder. It's a absolutely wonderful gizmo where you can log on to that site, put your zip code in there, and it will give you kind of the top rated native plants for your zip code in terms of enhanced wildlife. And these are some of the top ones for the 28173 zip code. So I encourage all of you to go out there and play around with that. And if you haven't bought some of Doug's work, I would highly recommend it if you have any interest in the landscape. I put a picture of this pink tree down here, and if we were in an environment where I would ask you all to identify the significance of that tree. That is a flowering dogwood, which is the flowering tree of North Carolina. So you can all make note of that if you didn't already know it. Our urban forest is threatened, and it would be hold true for Davidson, Charlotte, and Marvin for sure, and Waxhaw. We are losing a lot of trees to development. I'm going to give you a few fun facts about that. But a lot of these willow oaks are timing out too. I mean, if they were put in around the turn of the century between 1900 and 1915, that puts them at a little over 100 years old. And if you look at the number of trees that are removed by the street tree program in Charlotte every year, it's continuously going up. The last time I looked at it was about 1,200 trees in 2018, and there was a steady rise up because of old age. So they're aging out, and you may notice, if we get a long period of rain and we have leaf-on conditions and we have a violent storm, we are losing a lot of trees under that environment. When the soil is soft, we have leaf-on conditions, so the trees have a lot of resistance against wind, and the ground is soggy. It can be really, really tough. So the storms are hard. We lost about, I think it was about 80,000 trees, major trees during Hugo in 1989. Let's just hope we don't have another event like that, which is such a direct hit. But utility work is, when Google went through and did all this fiber work, a lot of tree damage during that episode. And just the maintenance of utilities in an urban environment is hard on trees. We have some vulnerabilities to diseases. Most recently, you probably have all read about the emerald ash borer. Came into Michigan, has basically spread throughout the entire East Coast, and we've fallen prey to that. So there are threats to the canopy. We lose a lot of trees to development every year. One of the first planting projects we did with Tree Charlotte was in 2012 in an area called Peachtree Hills. There were a few hills, there were absolutely no peach trees. And the area was, first developed in 2004. And I just wanted to show you what that area looked like in 2002 before the development took place, and then what it looked like afterwards. And unfortunately, this is not just like a one-off case. This happens a lot. And unfortunately, in the city of Charlotte, I think there's a lot of room to improve the tree ordinance, but unfortunately, back in 2011 and 12, when the city council approved their tree goal of a 50% canopy, maybe some of you have heard that. They took on a catchy phrase of 50 by 50 because it was 50% by 2050. Everyone signed on to it. It was a great idea. There was a lot of energy behind it, but there was really no linkage at all between that goal and the regulatory arm of land development. And so with that disconnection, as we turned the crank on development up to about 2008, and then we had a pause in 2008, and we picked up again in 2012. We've been going really strong the last 3 or 4 years. We've lost a lot of trees as a result of that. This was a neighborhood that had been slated for tree planting. This was Slater Springs. And one of the things that goes on, and all of you can appreciate this being wildlife enthusiasts, is we end up with a fragmentation of the canopy, which is really hard on wildlife. And you can see a little bit of that in this picture. Here's another, case. This was a case study that was done on new development in the Steel Creek area. You can see in the upper left corner here what it looked like in 2012. You can see what it looked like in 2018, and the red basically shows through LiDAR, which is a technology platform using satellite imagery of the tree loss that occurred during those 2 periods of time. If we take a look at a study like what I just showed you, but do it over the entire city, which was done in 2019, looking at data between 2012 and 2018, we lost just about 10,000 acres of trees during that 6-year time period within the city limits of Charlotte. There was a gain of about 2,200 acres. So the net difference was a net loss of about 7,700 acres, which meant that the canopy lost about 8% during that time frame. So it went down 4 percentage points from 49 to 45%. But the actual canopy loss was about 8% because the canopy covers about half the landscape in Charlotte. That's the loss of a lot of trees. And when you look at it and kind of translate it into maybe more bite-sized pieces, That's about 3.5 football fields a day on average, in terms of what was lost in the city of Charlotte during that 6-year time frame. Now, granted, that's a period of really rapid development, but that's also a tremendous number of trees. And one of the things that I realized after working at Tree Charlotte, when I was there, we planted, I don't know, about 30,000 trees. Now they're up to about 45 or 50,000. It's a great program, engages a lot of people, and educates a lot of people about trees. But I came to realize that we can't plant our way to success. We have to have an emphasis on preservation of trees if we're really going to maintain a robust urban forest. Here's a little bit of the numbers to make that case. So the net loss was about 1,300 acres of trees per year. That's equivalent, if you look at the equivalency of about 30, it takes about between 30 and 40 mature trees to cover an acre with canopy. So that 1,300 acres is equivalent to about 50,000 mature trees. It takes about 30 to 50 years to mature a tree. Tree Charlotte was planting 5,000 to 7,000 trees a year, which is very, but you can see that it's about 10%, maybe 15% of the tree loss during that time period. So we have to have this marrying together in a strategy of planting trees and engaging people to understand about the canopy and get engaged in it. And expand it through tree planting and community efforts. But we also have to have a really good tree preservation ethic in order to maintain the urban forest in an area that's urbanizing as fast as we are. And I make this point at the bottom here that tree preservation is vital, but it does face challenges from Raleigh because we are continuously being challenged to self-determine at the local level how we regulate our own urban forests. Utility maintenance, these are more on threats of trees, hard on the roots of systems or root systems for trees. We can do a lot rather than just taking a backhoe and digging a trench. There can be a lot done for running pipes through and around and under. You have to remember that on a mature tree, the root depth is somewhere around 18, 20 inches. And so a lot of times the utility lines can actually be bored under the tree, and prevent any significant tree damage. But as you can imagine, that costs money and it takes time too to do that. Our canopy is aging. Here's a big, beautiful old willow oak that unfortunately landed on somebody's car. And the emerald ash borer has done a lot of damage in our area. I don't know if you've seen it down in Union County. I would imagine that you have. But a lot of the, the ash trees that we have, like these riparian corridors. So a lot of the greenways around the region, which are in stream corridors, are loaded with ash trees. And a lot of those have died from being infested by the emerald ash borer, which is really unfortunate. It bores under the skin of the tree and within a couple of years, it kills it. The trees can be treated. It's a every 2-year kind of process. It's not cheap, $200 or $300, $400 a tree. And again, you have to be intentional to try to save those ash trees, which can't always be done. This was just making the case that we always need to look at tree diversity when we're planning our urban forest. And as time goes on, if you all want to do something down in Marvin to have more of an urban forestry program there, I would really highly recommend that you look at a diversification plan for the urban forests to create a resilient forest for the community. Storm damage, obviously we lose a lot to storms, and to a large degree, this is very likely to continue. I mean, we're having an increased intensity of storms. They're saying that's going to probably increase over time. In addition to that, our climate is changing. They are now forecasting, we're going to be closer to Tallahassee weather conditions by the year 2045, 2050 in there.
Hardly right.
Interestingly enough,
What about trees?
I read that's a problem. I read an article just the other day in the Wall Street Journal about how trees are adapting to climate change. And it was a fabulous article. And it talked a little bit about how trees are migrating. And, they're generally migrating north to try to find the climate zones that are really best for them. And the average migration is about a mile a year. And I thought that was really interesting. And so when I read about the change in temperature and equated it to Tallahassee, the distance between Marvin and Tallahassee is about 480 miles. And so if we're going to get to Tallahassee's average temperature level by the year 2045, that's about 15 miles a year that climate change is migrating. So the trees are migrating at a mile a year and the temperature is migrating at a much faster rate than that. And so I think it's going to be a challenge to see how our trees actually adapt to those conditions. So this is just another threat or stress that our trees are going to be under as time goes on. A well-managed, healthy urban forest really requires these three. I like to think of it as three pillars. One is community tree planting and education. That's more like a Tree Charlotte model where, we engage people to come out on a weekend. We plant a lot of trees. We work on diversification. We work on education. And again, you have to remember that 90 or 95% of any given urban forest is actually in the private realm. And so we need to democratize this passion and knowledge about the urban forest to everybody so that people can care for their trees. A relatively small percentage of the trees make up the street trees in any given community. And the street trees are typically located between the sidewalk and the curb. Those are in the public domain. And they're important because they're an important interface to people in the community, but they represent a relatively small percent of the total canopy. So it just absolutely requires by necessity involvement of a lot of people in the community to care for the trees and advocate for better policies. We need a tree ordinance and land use controls, and then lastly, a good street tree program with capital projects. And the street trees, in Charlotte, there's about 200,000 street trees. The city has to maintain those, and it's a tremendous responsibility. And a lot of communities, smaller communities, haven't tended to their street trees as well as they could have, and they're an important resource in the community. So those three pillars really make up the important pillars of managing the urban forest. What ties those together, ideally, is an urban forestry management plan that shows how those three things interface over time and work together in concert to protect and enhance the forest. I thought I'd just talk to you a little bit. I don't know much about what has happened down in Marvin. I do know a lot about what's happened in Davidson, and we've had some successes up here with trying to be really proactive on managing our urban forest. I thought I would share these with you with the idea that maybe some ideas will come out. And to the degree that I could work, Christina, with anybody down there who might be interested in this, I'd be happy to do that. Over the last 4 years, we did complete a street tree inventory. That's looking at all the street trees that are over a certain size. I think in our case, we looked at everything over 8 or 10 inches, inventory it, put it into a computer system, and start to figure out what the capital requirements are to really adequately prune and maintain those trees. How many emerald ash, how many ash trees do you have? How can we get a grant to treat those ash trees? Really proactively manage the resource. Most communities, particularly smaller communities, are reactive rather than proactive. A branch falls on a car, they go out and clean it up. If a tree dies and it's really apparent, they go out and take it down. But the real way to protect the canopy at the street tree level is to actively manage it in a proactive way. And you can't do that without an inventory. So that's an important step. We did establish a program here called Trees Davidson, which is largely a knockoff of Trees Charlotte, to help with community engagement and education. We then engaged a canopy analysis where we did imagery that's available actually, but you pay to have it analyzed to look at how the canopy has changed, what it looks like in different planning districts, and try to develop a strategy around how we're going to manage the canopy through the land use requirements in Davidson. From that, we set a canopy goal, and we decided rather than a 50 by 50 kind of goal that Charlotte has, one size fits all, we decided we would set canopy goals by planning districts. And we would coordinate and tie those planning regulations for each of those planning districts with that canopy goal. We then strengthened the tree ordinance. We went through a 2-year process of rebuilding the tree ordinance. That established a town arborist position, which has been filled. We established a tree fund for when there are payments because of any violations to the tree ordinance. Those are all put into a pot that is then put back into the canopy. And then we established this Trees Davidson program, which I mentioned earlier, volunteer tree planting, treasure tree program, identifying the trees that are really standout trees in the community that may have human stories with them as a community engagement tool, and make people more aware and more appreciative of the canopy that we have. And all this stuff has worked really quite well. I'm pleased with the way it's turned out. These are the planning districts, and I just put this up here not to go into detail, but you can see the percentages on the screen. We're really fortunate in that our village has more trees than you would typically expect, and that's largely because of the college campus, which is in fact an arboretum. And so we're lucky to have that. But anyway, these existing canopy levels were basically adopted as the goals of the ordinance. So what the town council said was, we don't want to lose any trees. We want to establish our ordinance to protect the trees that we have. And so rather than have a one-size-fits-all goal, we dovetailed it, as I said. We also came up with an analysis of how we had lost trees. We lost about 7% of our canopy, went from 57 to 53% during the 2009 to 2018 timeframe. That was about 330 acres of trees total in our tiny little town. That was good information to know. And this is basically where the tree loss occurred by planning district. And so we ended up creating by different planning districts goals and established a tree ordinance around those. So without going into the detail of all of this, you get the idea that I've kind of become, in working in this space, public policy space around urban forestry, to think that it's probably better to have a more refined goal or multiple goals than having just a one goal in the community. The planting strips are a really important part of urban forestry. And the tendency is to have 4 and 5 foot planting strips, because if you crush that area between the curb and the sidewalk, that means there's more land for the developer to sell and put a house on and improvements. And what happens is a typical development that was done 3 or 4 years ago created a 4-foot planting strip. You put a red maple in, as is the case here. And after a relatively short period of time, you've got to replace the sidewalk because of the damage that's occurred there. So, the arborist golden rule is right tree, right place. And you got to create the right place through the ordinance to have wide enough planting strips. If you drive around Dilworth or Myers Park, you'll see that they're anywhere from 6 to 8 to, in some cases, 12-foot planting strips. And I was at a conference not that long ago, and the guy who was presenting was really a real character, and he was a huge advocate of big trees in the urban environment. And I am too. And he said, you can't plant big dogs in narrow planting strips. And he's right. In a 4-foot planting strip, about all you can put in there is a crepe myrtle. And, as Doug Tallamy likes to say, you put a crepe myrtle and you might as well, put a stone statue out there in terms of its wildlife qualities. So I just mentioned this. I don't know anything about Marvin's ordinances or anything else, but if there were an opportunity to expand or widen the planting strips through any kind of local ordinance, it would pay dividends for the community. There's an awful lot of tree damage that happens during construction, and it's very easy to overlook this as part of a critical piece of an urban forestry initiative. But the roots in a tree are very vulnerable to compaction. And if they don't have oxygen, and if the water and the nutrients can't percolate down to those roots at the fibrous level, the tree is going to really be stressed out. Not to mention the vulnerability of the trunk, as in the case here of having a dumpster slammed against it. But many times the roots are out about on the drip edge of the tree. And so there needs to be a safe zone around these trees during construction so that you don't have root compaction and you're really protecting the tree for the long run. Again, an important piece of any ordinance. This is the street tree inventory. We engaged Bartlett to do it here in town, but there are other companies that do it. There's a great computer program. It's all web-based, and each and every tree is put in here and cataloged. And then there's a capital needs or capital requirement for each tree that's established over time. And this becomes a management tool to manage the urban forest at the street tree level. This is a street tree program, or the treasure tree program that we started. Again, this is these are the greatest trees around town, the largest or unique species. And many times there are stories that Uncle Joe planted this when he came back from the war, or, you know, whatever. And so the treasure tree program is one that's used in a lot of communities, and it's a great community engagement tool to bring people into the fold and have an appreciation. This is our largest willow oak. It's 65 inches on Spring Street here in Davidson. And it is, both of these are treasure trees, actually. And we do a lot of this kind of thing on the weekends, you know, getting the Rotary out to plant trees. And it's you know, you're not going to solve the world's problems by planting a 7 or 15 gallon tree, but it is a great way to get people engaged and to educate them about the importance of the urban forest. And as I tell these kids, we go into schools and do these school plantings. You know, number one, you're never going to forget the day, because the experience is going to stick in your mind. And number two, you're going to go off to college, and then you're going to come back and you're going to want to see how your tree's doing. I guarantee it. And it is the truth. It's a wonderful connection to place. So these are some books that many of you have probably read. These are my favorites. And I thought I would put them up here if any of you are interested. The Hidden Life of Trees. If you haven't read that, they now have this illustrated version, which is relatively new. It is a fabulous book about this unbelievably magic world of trees, the interconnectedness. And I'll tell you one quick story, and many of you have probably heard this, but one of the stories in the book is about, takes place in Africa with a grove of trees. And I don't remember the kind of tree it is, but it's a tree that the giraffe happened to really like. And the tree protects itself from the giraffe, because when the giraffe starts to nibble on the tree will exude a particular odor and a distasteful kind of sap that the giraffe has a negative reaction to. So in this large grove of trees that's made up of a whole bunch of different trees, but in one area, a giraffe over on the east side starts to nibble on the branches, and all the trees over on the west side start to exude this special, you know, stuff, right? So these trees are communicating in their micro roots, and all of this is described to some degree, well, to a large degree, in The Hidden Life of Trees. And that's just one example of kind of the magical world of trees. So I'm really been captured by it, and I'm a big fan of urban forestry and the importance of trees to our community, and just the wonder of trees and what they do for us. So these books are all wonderful in their own way, and they're all a little bit different. So Christina, I think that kind of ends what I wanted to cover. It's about, well, about 40 minutes, I guess, or so, or 35 minutes. So I'm going to stop there, and be glad to try to answer any questions anybody might have.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. Bob sent his questions directly to me, so others can't see them. So I will read them because they're good. You did talk about the diversity idea with planting trees. So his phrase was, what blend of trees would you recommend? So you don't want to just plant, 20 of the same type of tree. So what's a good mix, I guess, if you've got some extra space?
Well, first of all, there's a lot in the literature about native versus non-native urban trees. And here's my rule of thumb on this. It's controversial. There are a lot of people who are purists who just say you should always plant natives, period, end of discussion. And I can relate to that and understand it. However, I think a couple of factors are important here. Number one, a lot of times the urban environment is not a native environment. And so the soil has been disrupted, the microclimates are changed. And what's most important is to create a resilient, durable tree that's going to add value to that community over the longest period of time. And with the environment that we're in now, with the changing climate, you have to think about things like drought resistancy and things like that. So my rule of thumb on natives and non-natives is if you're in a built environment, plant the best tree that's going to add the most value to that community. If it is a native tree, then have a bias to planting a native tree. Always in a more native and natural environment. Like we do a lot of plantings in the back end of schools, where it's not the playground area so much as it is maybe a natural area that's on the backside of the school. That is a great place to put pure natives and a blend of natives and really wildlife rich trees in there. So that's the first issue in terms of what to plant. And that's controversial. You ask someone else, you'll get a different answer.
There's an interesting perspective though, because survival is more important than anything, right?
It is. It
Yeah.
is. I mean, it doesn't do any good to plant a native tree that's going to die.
Right.
But I think if you can plant natives, they obviously will add a lot of value, and particularly in the right setting, always with a mind toward connectivity, and trying to work against fragmentation. There is a lot of literature around what defines a diverse canopy. And species, family, genus, all this stuff. They have different percentages, 10, 20, 30 rule, all this other stuff. I just think you just need to plant a variety of trees that survive well in the community and look like they're going to be durable as the climate intensifies going forward. And try not to overplant any given thing. You all have been out to the airport. What's the tree that you see almost everywhere in the airport?
I haven't been.
It's the Bradford Pear.
Oh, good Lord, no.
So the story there is, and I remember I heard Jerry Orr at a presentation in this group that I was in. Jerry Orr loved Bradford pear trees. So now a lot of those have been systematically removed, or as you probably know, a Bradford pear will live 20 or 25 years and then it just self-implodes. And a lot of them have done that. But, that's the kind of thing you don't want to do. That's an invasive in mass quantities. So, but I do think that creating is an environment as much as you can of diverse trees is a good thing. And for anybody who's really interested in that, and some of the tree books that I had up there, they have a lot of detail on how you measure diversity. I think the most common one is this 10, 20, 30 rule, which I guess is 10% species, 20% genus, and 30% family. Species meaning red maple and genus meaning maple trees. So, that's probably a pretty good rule of thumb to follow.
Okay. Well, and kind of along with that, if any of us are gardeners, we know that it's warmer now than it was even 10 years ago. I can tell a difference. So what trees should we either kind of stay away from because they're just right there on the edge, and we're technically here in 8A, and I think you're in maybe 7B. I think that's how that works, because the line kind of runs through the middle of Charlotte. But there's no point in planting a tree here that is right there on the edge if you've got a choice to pick one that's going to be a little more heat hardy, if that's a phrase.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the first time 3 or 4 years ago, we started planting live oaks, and they're doing really well from what I can tell. And what was the tree that we planted that everybody was so high on that historically has done well here? And I have had, I was bald cypress. Have had terrible luck with bald cypress. And, it's a tree that doesn't do all that well in drought conditions. The maples are almost bulletproof, most of the maples. And unfortunately, the most common tree in North Carolina is the red maple. And so we just have to be careful. We've been fortunate they haven't had a lot of invaders on that. We've been really lucky with the willow oak that we haven't, really had problems with that. But, when I was growing up in Ohio, we had, elm trees everywhere. And of course, they all got wiped out and the neighborhood was decimated. There were a lot of communities in the Midwest that then went back through, and then they replaced all those elm trees with ash trees. And then the emerald ash borer came by and it's now wiped all those out. So, I'm not sure, Christina, how to answer your question in terms of those that are kind of right on the edge, but I think studying, maybe the way to do it is to look at the different zones that you mentioned and look at the recommended species in each of those zones and have a tendency toward going toward the southern zone.
Right.
I have one of the book. Let me go grab it real quick. I have one of the book that I want to highlight to y'all, and I forgot to put a picture in there.
Okay.
Grab it. Okay, hold on just a second.
And for those of you still on, I would suggest that you try the North Carolina, let's see, NCSU Plant Toolbox. And you can put lots of information about what area you're in and what type of thing you're trying to plant. And it will give you a long list of plants that will work in that area. I was talking about the NCSU Plant Toolbox. I don't know if you use that, but it's a great tool.
Yeah.
And just err on the side of hotter than cooler.
This is the other book I wanted to mention to you. I don't know if you can see that or not, but Hutchinson's Tree Book. It's written by Bob Head. And what I like about it, comes out of South Carolina. It's unique to our area in zones. And it is beautifully illustrated. It basically has one page per tree. And it goes into great detail about drought tolerance and other characteristics that will help you to gauge the ability of the tree to resist climate change. So this is really a good book if anybody's interested in that.
I have never heard of that one, so I wrote that down. That's great. I knew the other ones that you had. What's the best fruiting trees for bees and butterflies in your area?
I don't know the answer to that question. It's a good question. I would think that you could probably research that on the website that we talked about with the Wildlife Federation.
Mm-hmm. And the plant toolbox probably too. You could put pollinator.
Yeah.
I think that tulip poplars though are known for being a good source for bees early in the spring when they first bloom. But I don't know if they grow up there like they do down here. My yard is full.
Yeah.
Of tulip poplar trees.
Yeah, we have a lot of those, and I'll tell you from personal experience, a basswood tree,
Mm-hmm.
a great tree. It's it's a weak tree, but boy, do the bees ever love it. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, that's good to know. I don't think I have any of those. You talked about the native trees. What is the best things? Oh, somebody wrote that pawpaws and persimmon trees are good for that too.
Yep.
And those are nice little trees. They stay small, and persimmons particularly are beautiful in the fall. They're just gorgeous little trees. And you might get a persimmon off of them. If we were going to look at our own yards, and some people have a little bit of space and some people don't, what is the one thing that we personally could do that would make it even a little bit of difference?
Do away with fescue.
Yay.
Go to the back end of Talamy's book, Nature's Best Hope, and there are 8 or 9 steps in there. And as he says, I think it's maybe it's 40 million acres. If people took half their yard and just converted it to natural space, it would be more space than all the national parks or whatever.
It's an amazing number. I've forgotten too, but
it is. It is. And so, if you could renaturalize half of your yard and load it up with native plants that are really strong for wildlife, and then talk to your neighbors and try to really create connectivity, that's probably the best thing that folks can do.
I agree. Trade your grass for tree islands. Who likes to mow grass anyway, right? I mean, I don't get that. I'm sorry if there are grass lovers out here. One of the questions is a little more specific to Union County, but I'll throw it out there and maybe you could give us an idea on what our next steps need to be relative. You sort of covered some of it earlier. If we wanted to do a tree planting event in the county, and it's a big county, where should we focus? And maybe this is true for anybody. It's on the areas that have had the most construction. Do you focus on the rural area? Where's the best place to focus this event? Because we can get the trees. North Carolina Wildlife Federation will give us the trees.
I over the years have done a lot of plantings in neighborhoods. We have this, we go in and plant in common areas. We have tree stores in communities where we give trees away. We've done planting in parks, nature preserves. We've done planting at schools. And I think either parks or schools are absolutely the best place to plant. It's public land. People get enthusiastic about it. You're adding value that will go beyond the individual property owner. It's easy to attract public capital to that kind of a project and enthusiasm. And you can sidecar this to initiatives and groups that already exist, like the PTO in a school can get behind this and really make it an educational event for the kids. So I don't know, we planted, and when I was at Tree Charlotte, I think we planted 35 school campuses and had a lot of success with that. And it's amazing, the school budgets, particularly, and I'm not sure about Union County, but Mecklenburg, I mean, they build schools really at the very, very basic level. They come in, they remove all the topsoil, they build the building at you know, this minimalist kind of level. The landscaping is very, very poorly done and minimalist. And there may be some seed down, but that's about it. And so it takes a lot of work because you really have to work the soil. A lot of times you have to fertilize the soil when you plant the trees. It takes a little extra effort, but the payoff is even greater because the areas are in great need. A lot of times you can head off an erosion problem before it actually happens on a new school campus. And again, you know, these tree planting things are great in principle for expanding the canopy. They're not like preserving trees in terms of statistically actually protecting canopy, but it is a great way to engage the community and create an army of people who care about this as a topic. And that is really what that's all about, what community tree planting is all about.
That's a good point. And you did bring up the point that maybe the most important thing we could do is to keep the trees we have and kind of baby the babies. Because, you know, if you have a tree, you generally get babies of the tree. So to keep the trees you have and not cut them down.
Yeah, tree stewardship is a really important part of any successful urban forestry program. And it relates to not only, you know, the regulatory part of this in terms of how we're going to protect trees through the development process, but you also want to engage the community and arm them with the knowledge so that they can do a good job of stewarding their own trees. Again, it's the vast majority of the urban forest is in private hands.
Yeah. So anybody else have any questions? Any more questions? This has been a great presentation and got me really thinking about lots of things. I will note to you guys, anybody that's in the Marvin area, we're going to have National Night Out on the 5th of October, and I will have a lot of seedlings from my white oak tree. Had multiple babies this year, and so I'm going to be sharing those with anybody that wants them. So if there aren't any more questions, I will. We're getting lots of thank yous down here in the chat box. As usual, they loved it. So thank you, Dave. That was wonderful.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the opportunity and thanks for what you all do for wildlife in your community and for supporting the Wildlife Federation in your own chapter. And delighted to be part of this and really nice to, I wish I could meet all of you physically, but you know, maybe sometime down the road, we'd be planting some trees together. Who knows?
Yeah, actually, yeah, that would be great. So thank you guys. I'm going to stop the recording, but I have a question for you if you've got just a second.
Dave, I just want to jump in real quick. I know there's a run for the green this weekend. Will there be anybody actually at the park area?